So, we have last week we introduced the acrylic paints, and I painted over a drawing that we'd done previously in class. So we looked at underpainting and then working back in with the colours, which is what we worked on last lesson. So I did say, and I said this to the other classes as well, that we would continue with the acrylic paintings this week and the week after as well. Um, and I also mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but I was going to do sort of a bit of painting based just on waves and stuff so that we could experiment with other things like um, palette knives and toothbrushes and things like that to do splattering and all that sort of thing. But with waves, as it goes with our theme of reflections and so forth. So I thought we'd have a little go at that. I've started by doing a drawing today, so I'll show you that in a minute. And for this lesson, I'm going to work over the top of a copy of that drawing and see how far I get with applying the colour and some of the textures and techniques, and then we'll work on that again next week. So whereas you might be working on your animal paintings or whatever you were doing last week, I'll be working on this, which we'll then do the following week. Okay, so I'll go over to the wall over here. So these are these are a couple of the pictures. I put quite a few photos.
Wow.
Yeah, they're gorgeous, aren't they?
Wow.
I put a few photographs on to the website. I've also
Really?
put some new animal pictures on there as well. So you've got, if you're fed up with looking at the old pictures, there's some new ones there for you too. But there's quite a few wave pictures. So I've drawn this one. Woo! I've drawn this one today, and that's the
Wow.
one I'm going to be working on. Okay. So I'll go over to the desk just here. So you'll remember all of these, of course, which are my animals in pencil. So one of the things I talked about when we did these was just trying to get me focused a bit better. One of the things I talked quite a lot about was doing an underdrawing or an underpainting using choosing a color to do the tones, shadows and textures first of all, and then we carried that idea on to using paint. So from the color pencil and using a little bit of the old pens that we looked at last time, I did a painting of this lovely boat, which I photocopied. There's a photocopy of it just there. I did do a pencil version of it, talking about the cross hatching and the layering of different colours over and under sort of drawing. So I put in all the tones and colours in again with the dark brown, and then work back over with the colour after that. Okay, and then last lesson, in the daytime that was, I did this one, which I finished off a little. I can't remember if I finished it off during the lesson or I'd already done that, but yeah, so I used a lot of mark making techniques on the top of this, as well as doing the underpainting. So I did the underpainting with both textures and just burnt umber and ultramarine. Just trying to get it focused again. And ultramarine, and then I started applying the other colours that were in the photograph back over the top. So I ended up with quite a textured and experimental painting, which was a lot of fun to do. So following that, when I was in lesson with you, I did Tyrone the tiger, if you remember Tyrone. So there was Tyrone, and the week before we did the reductive technique, where we removed the negative shapes and then worked in with the tone and stuff and the textures. And then I did the painting of him after that, noting of course with reflections that the reflections are often a little bit darker and often distorted like the bottom of this one, but I used first of all I put this blended colour underneath the drawing that I'd copied, and then started to working with the ultramarine and the burnt umber again, so that I could put the tones and shadows and the textures in before then applying over the top all these colours and things. And I did a slightly different technique there. I was doing a lot more sort of dabbing and small brush strokes to show his fur and so forth. Of course, I think it could be a she, you know, who knows. And then in the background I applied the colour white, and I had a little bit of the green coming through and some of the little brush strokes to add my own ideas with highlights and things like the water rippling and so forth. All right, so that was last week. Now you might still be working on that stuff, but that's absolutely fine. Please don't feel like you've got to stop something to start something else. I know I say that every week now, but it's because I've done that and I'm thinking about what you could be doing next. Okay, so this is the wave that you saw a few minutes ago. I put the photograph on there as well. As you can see, the photograph, as is often the case, is a bit more, it's got a bit more depth and colour than on the screen here. But what I did with this drawing is I divided the picture down here into 4, folded it. I did the same with this area here, and then I started to add very lightly with a 2B pencil some of the directional lines and a kind of a very light shaded picture, so that I could allow myself to make mistakes, or to have to be able to go back and make corrections and so forth. So I did a very light drawing to start with, and then gradually started to add more tone until I went over to what I've got here, a 6B pencil, to add real dark shadows. So the idea then today is that I'm gonna start painting back over this, and I'll talk through what I'm doing a little bit as I'm doing it tonight. But I'll just zoom in so you can see in a little bit more detail some of the marks that I've done. So obviously I've shaded some areas very dark, but and that's to reflect some of these details in here. I haven't gone as detailed as the photograph, but you can see some of these lovely fine details that I've then scumbled into the photograph, or into the drawing over here. And you've got lots of wiggly sort of little lines to sort of express the movement in the photo as well. And then down here, much longer lines to suggest that movement of the wave going upwards as well. So it's taking ideas from there and perhaps using some of the mark making techniques that we've talked about before to show the movement and the expression in the wave picture itself just there. So not too bad. I could probably spend a bit longer on that one, but I thought it'd be nice to get started on some of the painting. So I'm probably going to start with a layer of a mid-tone of colour over the top of the whole photocopy. And here's my photocopy just over here. So I just did that just before the class, put it on the photocopier. So I've got a slightly lighter image to work on, but I've also got all of these details all mapped out ready to go. Okay, so that's what I'll be working on today. I'll be using some blue, and then I'll start building up with the whites and using a bit of a palette knife, I hope, as well. Next week I'll probably do one that's a bit more freestyle rather than working over a drawing, but we'll deal with that bit when we come to it. All right, so that's where we're going next. We have a bit of fun with palette knives and waves in the next few lessons, but for now I guess who's still Okay, so the first thing I needed to do with this piece was, and as you know, this is a photocopy of my original drawing. So I decided to use, bearing in mind the overall colour of the picture were these lovely blues and greens. I've done kind of a wash of colour underneath with a primary blue. And then the idea from here was to work with darker blues to work into the shadows. And the nice thing about working over a painting, a drawing, is that you've already got all of the locations of the shadows and things kind of mapped out for you, so you can just work straight over the top. So a few people have said can you work over an original pencil drawing, and yes you can. Acrylic does work very well over lots of different media. It's kind of a plastic resin medium, so it once it's dry it's there for good and creates this lovely layer that you can then work back over as well. I've often used colour pencils with acrylic paints as well, so it's a great medium. And as you've just seen, I put this layer of colour underneath, and that was very watered down acrylic paint to create a transparent wash over the surface of the picture. Now with the darker tones there, I worked with a little bit of burnt umber and a little bit of ultramarine to make a nice deep, almost black colour to give those nice deep areas. And then over the top of that, as you can see at the moment, I'm working with more of a tint, so I've added some white to some blue just there. So some of the blue, I've used quite a large range of blues on this. I haven't used much cobalt. The cobalt's quite good for the background area where it's kind of grey, but I've got things like Vitalio, turquoise and things like that mixed in there to create this lovely sea sort of oceanic colour in there as well. So you can see there's lots of layers of colour being built up on the surface, and I watered down, sorry about that, I watered down the paint quite a lot, so that we get these nice layers appearing on the surface of the picture. And a lot of the brush strokes are flowing long lines and things like that. And you can see me here just towards the background there where it's kind of blended and misty and murky and grey in the background there. I use my fingers quite a lot to smear the paint around the background. I'll do that a little bit more later as well. Now, as you can see, I'm adding some highlights and stippling. It's a really nice way to sort of start adding some texture. In fact, you know, the painting is quite monotone in a sense, really, because we're just using blues and whites in this. And there was a little bit of the burnt umber to make this really dark, deep colour in the water there. But not loads, just a little bit. So I'm constantly referring back to the photograph as I work, looking for the ridges in the water as it flows up onto the wave. And this gradual laying effect does take time. And the interesting thing is that, you know, once you then add the contrasting bits in a little bit later, which is the whites, where I use the palette knife, things really start to come alive a little bit more as well. So here we are, look, I've got the palette knife and I'm using multi-directional marks to get the sense of the frothiness of the water. So, I mean, I could use more directional marks in some cases, but here I just thought, well, let's create the sense of this foam bursting all over the place as it reaches the crest of the wave. So lots of fun. You can see the effect that it's already having. It's creating contrast between the deeper, sort of darker parts of the wave and the lighter parts, which gives it form and depth.
The other thing about working with these, with this kind of wave subject matter is that, you know, there's a little bit of freedom for you to add in some of your own ideas or some of your own marks and experiment a little bit as well, which is pretty much what I'm doing with the wave here. So working back around the top, you can start to see the form of the wave appearing quite nicely on there now. I'm using lots of dabbing. I'm also stippling with the palette knife as well, so you get the little bits of loose froth sort of coming off the edge of the main body of the froth on there. Now it is very starkly white on there, but what you can do once the paint's a little bit drier is you can add some more stipples in another blue, over the top, or when it's really dry you can do some glazes of colour. That's really thin little bits of colour back over the top as a kind of a little tiny wash in certain areas to give the foam itself a little bit of form as well, because it's not just flat, is it? It's got shape and form alongside it as well. So there's a bit of grey towards the back which I wanted to put in, but not forgetting of course that I am doing this picture of a wave, but I can put in myself, if you like, my own ideas into this too. So I did this painting over a couple of hours and it came off quite well really for the time that I had. Here I'm using a toothbrush in a very controlled way, and I'm also dabbing away areas of the toothbrush splattering with a cloth that I wasn't so enamoured with, or that I didn't need there. So the splattering creates that finer spray that you can see on the wave as well. So we've got some nice depth in there as well now. This is looking okay, it's looking good. And then more stippling and working into it. So, you know, you could probably spend a little bit more time working into this painting afterwards to add some finer details, more highlights and things. Here I'm just using some blue, putting some ideas in of my own, basically using a bit of blue to emphasize the blueness of the wave in certain areas. But we've got some nice atmospheric effects going on. You can see that I've smeared around the crest, the inside, the arc of the wave, and towards the background a bit as well. Not quite as grey as in the original, but in the original photo you can see, and not as green. One thing I mentioned a few times to students is that on screen you will see probably more colours in the RGB, which is red, green, blue colour scheme of the computer, than you will on the printer. So I use a standard inkjet printer which doesn't have such bright, vivid and mixed colours. So I did sort of put a little bit more green in this picture later, but well, you know, I like blue. Blue's a good colour as well. That's my excuse. So there we go. So it's worth sometimes looking at a digital version of your photo if you've got it off the internet, because you will see some differences between those things, a printed version on paper and the digital. So I've added more grey into the background. There is a little bit more colour in that grey, which I haven't put in. But you know, I could go back later on and add this. It's almost like got a kind of a yellowy tinge to it, which would help to draw us back into the background past